In this age of the bad mouth, where a kind word is as rare as a Buick in a college town, translation has had more than its share of opprobrium. This is probably due to its being a kind of bastard art, an intermediate form, and as such always vulnerable to attack. Translation is almost as old as language, certainly as old as the contact of a language with alien speakers. In spite of the fact that it is an ancient craft, its ways are still rather mysterious, and most analyses have fallen short of the mark in defining what translation is, or at least what it should be. The inconsequence of the last fact would seem to make translation an art, something defined by its very existence or by its uses, as Ortega might have put it. Problem seekers will find an inordinate amount of material in translation precisely because it partakes of other, more definable aspects of writing. It is a sort of literary suburb lacking a core or personality of its own. If it is not clearly derivative, it is then treasonous and even treacherous, for it will be misleading. If it is too servile to the alien form, then it is guilty of misfeasance rather than malfeasance, for it has not carried over the natural level or feel of the original. The translator can be adventurous, but he cannot be an adventurer as the original writer can be. He must follow the explorer's route, albeit in a different type of vessel. Perhaps the main difference between the art of fiction, for example, and that of translation is that the translator's prime task is concerned with words, the tale, and the ideas all having been received. In the age-old and disputed dichotomy of form and content, his work is solely concerned with the former, as he tries to do as little concomitant mischief to the latter as possible, none in an ideal translation. Therefore, a textual analysis of translating lies closer to the realm of semantics and linguistics than to more diffuse literary study. Still and all, there is no manual or handbook for the creation of a perfect translation, as there is none for the writer of a novel. In both cases, only the crisis or the critic or reader would be adequately served by such a guide. Machines can now do rudimentary translations, and the results, practical as they may be, are literary abominations. The basic problem of the writer as he moves along is that he must name things, objects, actions, ideas. He must often choose among possibilities and synonymous for the mot juste. But once it is his creation, at some point he can sit back and cease pondering. It is his work. Take it or leave it. The translator, however, is at once removed. He must find the language difficult. The original agonizing is still there with his own added to it. Borges once advised his translator, Norman Thomas Di Giovanni, to write what he was trying to say, not what he was saying. In that case, it was easier because the writer was on hand and knew English. The advice is good, but how can you be sure what is meant by trying to say? The writer can be Adam, giving names to things as they parade by, but the translator cannot be that inventive. His craft is what Ronald Christ might properly call the narrow act. The translator's chore is, therefore, sometimes even more difficult than that of the writer, for he must subordinate himself to two languages, not one. With simple objects, Platonic ideals, the problem of meaning is easily solved. Tree is arbol, no doubt about it. Everyone will more or less see the same thing in his respective language. But if the words to designate this common object are so different, in fact, they do not coincide in number of syllables, and if we remember that represents two distinct sounds in English and Spanish, no two phonemes are the same. The mind's eye may be universal, but the ear has been trained to follow different paths. This extreme case is an example of one impossibility of translation. Translation can never be reproduction. It is not a copy. As the Latin root shows, it is a leading across to the other side, a setting over, as the Germans call it. There is nothing we can do about tree, and we can only hope that some hidden subtlety was not missed and lost in translation. This impossibility is what ultimately renders poetry untranslatable, or stricto sensu, still further removed from reproduction. Indeed, Robert Frost saw fit to use translation as the touchstone for his definition of poetry, what's left out in translation.